Secret Circle.
Welcome back to the Secret Circle with your host, Luke Deckard, which is me. I have an exciting guest tonight, Matthew Booth, who is a crime fiction author. He's written a number of books, including The Talent for Murder, Danger of the Night, and most recently, The House of Skulls, which is a very fun 1940s PI novel set in London. Very, very cool. Tonight we're going to be chatting about a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm excited. I'm excited to dive in and talk with Matt about his new book and noir fiction and all sorts of stuff. So without further ado, let's bring Matt in. Matthew, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. It's always good to have a chat.
Always good to be here.
Yeah. So I've read the House of Skulls. Your first in the Alex Priest mysteries. Really fun book. Really enjoyed it. So I got a bunch of questions about that, and we'll just see where the conversation takes us.
Let's see what we do.
So the first question I have. So for those who don't know, why don't you give a little bit of a brief intro to what this book is about?
It's a love letter to film noir and the books of people like Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, that sort. It's set just after the Second World War is finished. It's sort of on the day after all the bunting comes down, after the victory celebrations are done, and people start to say, well, now what? You know, we've won, but at what cost? So London is totally ravaged by war. Priest himself is a former cop he served in the war, suffered some things there, which slowly are revealed in the book. And he's now set himself up as a private eye. And he's hired to find a missing girl. And in the course of that investigation, as private eye novels often do, he gets embroiled in something which is much bigger than just a missing persons case, involving all sorts of blackmail, corruption, murder, and something which is called the House of Skulls, which I won't say anything about because you'll have to read the book.
Yes, no spoilers. No spoilers. So this is kind of one of those lame questions that I think people ask at like various like crime fiction-y panels and things like that. But you know, people's like, how'd you go with these ideas? But I am curious as to how did you land on wanting to write this particular book? What was the process? How did the stars align that you thought this is what I wanted to do?
Ever since childhood, you know, sort of 11 and 12, when I first got into crime fiction through Sherlock Holmes, I've had two core loves. One is Golden Age, and one is
Whiskey.
Private Eye. Yeah, yes. One drives you to the other.
Yeah.
And A Talent for Murder and The Dangers of This Night are really Golden Age homages, I think is the right word. So yeah. I'd sort of there's a third one coming out, and I've sort of scratched that itch, and I sort of achieved that now. So I thought, well, we'll move on to the second great love then.
Yeah.
But it's a very American concept,
and
I thought to myself for a while, can you have a believable, a credible British private eye when they are so American? And I toyed with that I sort of struggled with that for a while, a few years really, because I also very, very keenly wanted him to look like a private eye.
Yeah.
So I knew he had to be set in period.
Yeah.
But the period that Philip Marlowe's working in, a British person would probably of the right age would probably have been fighting a war. So, he wouldn't be walking around unless he was injured in some way. He wouldn't be walking around solving crimes in London. So that's when I hit upon the idea of just after the Second World War, which I thought was an interesting period and not one that's necessarily been examined very, very often. But I was still stuck with this British-American clash, and then purely by chance, I read the Sherlock Holmes, not all of them, but I read them regularly, just because that's where it all started for me. Started to think, well, wait a minute. If you swap the 221B sitting room for a shabby office at the end of a corridor, and if you swap a hypodermic needle for a bottle of whiskey, and if you swap a fedora for a deerstalker, you've got the Private Eye template here. Holmes has got more in common with Marlowe than he has with Poirot, for certain.
I agree.
So, yeah, maybe you can actually, and also maybe that could be a sort of marketable gap that I could exploit. I mean, there are British Private Eyes. There are a lot of them, but they're not. The ones that I've come across aren't firmly entrenched in that legacy that Chandler and Hammett left us. And I really wanted mine to be, because as you know, I'm also a massive film noir fan.
Yes.
So I wanted it to be evocative of those great black and white films, which really is why the cover, I'll just plug it again. The cover is black and white. I was quite sort of, they did ask me for ideas, the publishers, and I was quite sort of adamant it should look like a noir.
Yes.
So that was it, really. It was the challenge of making something that's inherently American credible as a British concept.
It's tough. That's tough. I really agree with your take on what you're saying about Holmes and him sort of being very close to the Private Eye, the American Private Eye, in many ways. I wrote an essay about it actually several years ago, where I sort of basically looked at that. I looked at Holmes and how in many ways he does sort of hold a lot of the ingredients that you then find in Sam Spade and Philip Marlowe and Lou Archer and so on and so forth. Because like essentially when you look at hard-boiled fiction, it is a blend of the American Western and Golden Age fiction. It's still the mystery. There's still the mystery element. It's just it's just those two stories, where the Golden Age is where the Sherlock Holmes kind of stuff and Poirot, and their story is about the investigation, whereas the hard boiled stuff, the murder hasn't happened yet. There's a personal element to that story which you don't really find in the Holmes and Poirots and things like that, where those guys don't become personally invested in the case. To them, it's just a cold investigation in a puzzle to solve. But there's so much kind of film noir homages going on in your book that I really, really enjoyed, and I could kind of, as I was reading it, I could picture those scenes, like you can evoke like scenes that you could see in like the Maltese Falcon or any number of Humphrey Bogart films and things like that, which I just thought was really wonderful. And I also really enjoyed the cover. I think the cover is a great homage to that sort of stuff. And I think it is tricky trying to place the American archetype of the hard-boiled detective in an English setting. I mean, the last book I wrote, which is called Wasteland, which is we'll see where that goes. I mean, that is a 1920s PI novel set in London and Edinburgh, and I just made an American protagonist. Because it's for me, I just thought, you think about Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald and all these guys and people who are Americans who are hanging out in Europe post First World War and avoiding Prohibition and all that kind of stuff. There's a bunch of them hanging out here, and I thought, well, what if someone just decided to say, I ain't going back to that hellhole. It's it's shit enough. After the war, I might as well just hang out here. Why not? So I kind of went that route with it, where I thought, let's just actually have the American hard-boiled detective on the mean streets of London and Edinburgh. but I do think absolutely. I mean, back in the day, there were British PIs in the 20s and 30s and 40s, and they're British PIs now. So it is a thing that existed in real life and still exists, but in terms of like fiction, it back in those days, your amateur detectives were always some twee rich individual who was just solving
Absolutely.
crimes for
Yeah.
kicks and things like that. And
Yeah.
it's a pattern that modern British crime fiction hasn't really gotten away from. I don't think. It's still quite rife.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And the protagonist in my uh, Golden Age novels is
Mhm.
exactly one of those.
Yeah.
He is a privileged, rich, retired uh, criminal judge.
Yeah.
You know, so because there are certain sort of tropes, I suppose is the word. That's the fashionable word for it. That
Mm.
people, I think audiences, whether they're readers or spectators or whatever, expect certain things. When they get
Yeah.
a golden age type story, they're not going to want a tough, cynical, hard drinking um, detective to solve the body
Yeah.
in the library. They're going to want a twee English spinster or somebody
Yeah. Yeah.
similar.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I think you've got to sort of play the game really. But the
Definitely.
trick is to try and do something different with it. And I did. I mean, I was sort of I was placated in my concerns, I suppose, because I thought, well, how realistic is Philip Marlowe? Really,
Mm.
not very. I would have thought. I think Sam Spade is much closer to what, given Hamlet's background as a Pinkerton agent, it's much closer to what a private eye would be
Mm.
at that time. But Marlowe's sort of a romanticized version of it, and I sort
Yeah.
of wanted to try and do. I'm much more a Marlowe fan than I am a Spade fan, I have to say. So
Mm.
I was always veering towards Marlowe more than Spade, but just to try and bring some sort of credibility to it all.
Yeah.
So I don't do it. There are none of the you'll know, Luke. There are none of those sort of Marlowe-esque similes.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Priest doesn't do any of that.
Yeah. I
And I
I
was
actually have
very
questions
keen.
about that. I found it interesting that your style you went for a more Dashiell Hammett style
Yeah,
with this book. It's third person, which is what you get with the Continental Lop and what you get with the Maltese Falcon.
yeah,
And I so I, that one a question I had about that actually was sort of um, you know in terms of tense, you know why were you eager to go more, not eager, but why were you wanting to go more with the Sam Spade style of hard-boiled fiction versus the Chandler?
because I've read too many and tried to write too many first-person, private eye, hard-boiled novels that, whether it's by design or by accident, um, come across as bad Chandler pastiches. Now,
Mm,
some, not all of them, not all of them. I'm not saying that,
yes.
but I didn't. I suppose I didn't trust myself really not to fall into that trap. And
Yeah.
I thought I've already got the lonely office, the hard drinking, the hat and the coat, and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
If I do first person, it's going to be too close.
Okay.
So doing it in the third person was a way of sort of distancing it because I didn't want it to be a carbon copy. And
Yeah.
then I thought, well, you're not playing the game there really. But then, like you say, I thought, well, Maltese Falcon's third person.
Mm,
No, that's a classic. That's all right, isn't it? Dashiell
indeed.
Hammett can get away with it, so why can't I? But really, it was a conscious decision
Yeah.
because I tried it before and had fallen into the trap and just given up because
Yeah.
nobody, before or since, nobody's written quite like Raymond Chandler has.
No,
Um,
not like Raymond Chandler, but I mean, I'm very much a hard-boiled guy when it comes to my writing. That's the stuff I love, and that's the stuff I write now. But I guess similar to you, my some of my early works are Golden Age stuff.
yeah,
And very much that
Golden Age
school.
stuff is very good for. It's very good for focusing. You've got to do a lot of
Mm.
work in the golden
Mm.
age. E.D. James used to say it's like writing a sonnet.
Yeah.
You've got to abide by the rules, but
Yes.
you've got to abide by the structure of it all.
Yeah.
But they're very difficult to do well.
I think so.
Because they've got to be credible. And it's already a fairly incredible setup that there's going to be an isolated place where 7 people have all got reason and opportunity to kill the same person. To make to sell that is quite hard.
It is. It is.
And it was one of the things the Priest book brought its own different challenges, its own challenges. But the sort of getting rid of the responsibility, I think, to a reader of saying, guess this before I tell you the answer, because it doesn't really matter in this sort of book. You might know who the villain is on page 1. The mystery. I think Chandler says something like this. The mystery is not purely who's done it, why, and how, but what's at the heart of it all.
Yeah.
Why are these people covering things up? Why are these people in the situation they're in? Yeah. And that's quite liberating when you've written Golden Age before,
Yeah.
Sorry, I went off on a tangent then.
No, it's true though. It's true. I mean, that's why I think the hard-boiled stuff more now than I do the Golden Age stuff, because it's really about, for me, it's about the detective, just sort of the hard-boiled detective is generally not anywhere near as clever as like the Holmes or the Poirot and things like that. He or she is just some individual who is street smart, intelligent, and tough, and just goes out, gets hired to do a job, and is tenacious enough and quick-witted enough to maneuver high society, low society, and shake the trees enough and just to see what falls, and then try to put the pieces together once they're there. I think someone once kind of described this type of fiction as the fragments washed against the shore from T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland, which I always loved, because at the end of that poem, it's like these fragments against the shore that they're all it's all sort of chaotic, and you're trying to make some sort of sense out of it, and that's really what hard-boiled fiction is all about. It's a bunch of scattered fragments, and you're trying to piece together some sort of coherent story and understand why people do the things they do, and it's nowhere near as neat or as tidy as the golden age stuff, because it's far more about like people. It's far more about people and their and why people act the way they act than it is about the grand, complicated way in which Lord McDoofus wanted Lady McDufferty to die.
Yeah, and there's following on from that, in a book like The House of Skulls, I didn't have to worry too much about clues.
Yeah,
and finding something that is seemingly irrelevant, but is actually crucial, and that because they're very difficult to come up with. I find those very difficult.
Yeah, man.
Whereas Priest, by his very nature, Priest is a man who relies on his wits and his instincts. So, and then, like you say, just keeps prodding and prodding and prodding.
Yeah. Until
either he gets a kick in, or somebody gives in, or somebody tells him something. And it's that tenacity that the private eye character, as opposed to the amateur detective character, has, because not everything he finds has to be a cryptic crossword clue. I mean, Sherlock Holmes famously says, "I never guess," but Priest is guessing all the time, because that's what real people do. Real people say, "Well, it must be that." It must be that, because nothing else makes sense.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be a nice tidy package at the end.
No. So I am curious though, why did you choose post World War II for the setting of this? What was the appeal of that?
Film noir, really.
A
combination of that. That's the period that I think that I associate most with film. It's when film noir was at its heyday, the sort of mid to late 40s, early 50s. but also, like I say, I didn't want to do a wartime story because I'd have to explain why he wasn't fighting. And the Golden Age stuff was all in the 30s, so I didn't want to do the 30s. And then I thought, the further I go back, I'm just in danger of doing a Sherlock Holmes pastiche here. If I go too far back. So I thought about this sort of no man's time where everything is just settled down and people are looking around at the devastation that's left and saying, well, where do we go now?
Yeah.
And it seemed to me that you could do you could talk about the Second World War, which is a subject I find fascinating. You could talk about the second, but in as people's memories and as people's reactions to it, and as people talking about how they've changed. So it becomes almost like a spectre, and like a shadow that's still over the city, even though we won. The Allies won.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of those two things. It seemed it satisfied, it scratched the film noir itch, but it also, I hope, allowed me to say something quite interesting about how people were left.
Yeah. I think that's a really interesting idea. I love that, and it was something I really enjoyed exploring in Wasteland, actually, because similar to yours, mine's 1920s, so mine's England, particularly Scotland, post World War One. And that idea of looking at where do we go next.
Yeah.
In the wake of this devastation, because you kind of like that the way you described that, like kind of like spectral shadow that's lingering over everything. I really like Philip Kerr's Bernie Gunther books.
Yeah, that's a series I absolutely devoured, and they're really good, and that's you always have the sort of people that you want to try and reach.
Yeah.
And try and be like. And he's certainly on the list of people that I would want to count as an influence.
Yeah, because when I was thinking about the House of Silk, I thought about Bernie Gunther, obviously Tishel Hammett, but he's of the time. And I also thought about Walter Mosley, because the Easy Rawlins stories. I don't know if you've read any of those yet. But yeah, like The Devil in a Blue Dress and is just an absolute classic. But that again is another fascinating look at post World War II life. But from the perspective of a black man in LA living in a black community, dealing with racism, but then suddenly becoming a PI of sorts, and having to kind of there's so much. It's interesting to me, like looking at some of this fiction and our fascination with exploring the world post big devastation, because I mean hard-boiled fiction emerged out of the post World War I fallout. It emerged out of the fact that everything was just devastated. There was in terms of like if you want to get like literary about it and theoretically, like modernism was big at play, and was also kind of battling with postmodernism and what is there centeredness, or is there any meaning to life, or is everything just corrupt, or so it's fascinating that so it's interesting that so many books tend to want to explore not necessarily the life during the war, though there are plenty of those, but like these kind of books love to do that just right after, because it's such an interesting landscape of. I mean, that's why I called my book Wasteland. I mean, it's and again, it's a reference to T.S. Eliot's poem, but it's like,
well, it was.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a phrase that's one of the central plot points of the House of Skulls is that there is this rebuilding program that this developer's doing, this sort of wannabe politicians getting off the ground, and he keeps referring to. Priest keeps coming up against people who say that London is bombed, bankrupt, and bitter, and that's like a sort of slogan that this man's taken on board. And essentially, that's what I thought. It's a specific time in a specific place, which I think all good crime fiction should have.
Yeah.
But it's one that really has a lot of possibilities, because there's a lot of things that people will have been thinking and doing that, if you've got a mind like ours, you can twist into a murder story or a crime story.
Yeah.
And again, to satisfy some tropes, all my favorite private eye novels and films, film noir films, all start with something small that escalates.
Oh yeah.
So rebuilding after the war seemed to me a time when people could sort of be on the take, grab and greed and all the rest of it, that all best film noirs deal with.
Absolutely. Yeah. In terms of like character creation, I'm interested to know like what was the process like creating Alex Priest?
That's a good one. Well, I knew I wanted him to be of a certain type, so I knew, but I also didn't want him to be a cliche.
Yeah. When you say certain type, what do you mean? For those listening at home.
Well, I mean tough, never giving up, willing to walk into a darkened room and take the consequences if it's in pursuit of truth.
Yeah.
As you know, the sort of attitude that Philip Marlowe has in, I think it's Farewell My Lovely, where he says, "I needed a vacation, I needed life insurance, I needed a house by the sea," or whatever it is. I had a hat, a coat, and a gun. So I went to work. I think it's something like that. That sort of bulldog attitude.
Yeah.
But also wanted him to be jaded, cynical. But then there are certain things I didn't want him to be. He's an ex-cop who becomes a private eye. Well, the cliche there is that he's fired from the police. So I didn't want him to be fired from the police.
Okay.
So I thought, well, why doesn't he, when he comes back from the war, why doesn't he go back to the police? So I thought about that, and I don't want to say too much about that because it comes out in the book.
Yeah.
But essentially, he says we were all abandoned, by all the rich toffs in Westminster.
Yeah.
Priest was a prisoner of war, and he feels that his country forgot about him. So he comes back distrusting all authority figures and things like that.
Yes.
The whole femme fatale thing. I thought, what do you do with that? I don't want him to be the sort that. I didn't want him to be sort of actively seduced and betrayed, or like all the film noir characters. So I thought we had to do something different to that, and so he can't be happily married. For heaven's sake, none of these people are ever happily married.
So that's not true. Spencer, Robert B. Parker's character. He's not married, but he's got Susan Silverman. But readers at the time bloody hated her, but I like her. I like Susan.
Well, you're an old softy.
Pro Susan.
Well, all right. The majority of them aren't happily married. That's
very true.
And of course, he can't go and do the things that he's going to do if there's someone at home worrying about it.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, what can we do different? What's his attitude towards women? And so I started to think about that, and that came up with a backstory. He has an issue about his mum. So all those things were attempts to do something a bit different, to make it mine, rather than it just being a very obvious Marlowe. Yeah. Marlowe light sort of thing.
Yeah. It's tough. I think the femme fatale aspect is particularly tough. And I remember because I don't want to give anything away about your book, but I remember reading March Violets, which is the first Bernie Gunther book by Philip Kerr. And there's this one bit where Bernie is hanging out with a film star, goes to her apartments and is chatting with her because it's connected to the case, and they just start banging. And I'm like, this is just
Yeah.
ridiculous. Like,
I didn't
come
want
on.
any of
Like,
that.
you're feeding into the trope, which I understand, but like, this is just, it felt a little over the top, a little bit indulgent, and even as much as I love Spencer and Robert B. Parker, his first book, the Godolph manuscript, there's there's this nuts couple of scenes where, like, at one point Spencer is he sleeps with the mother of this woman, of this daughter who he's kind of involved in a case with, and then the next scene goes and sleeps with the daughter, and I'm just like, oh, come on,
Yeah.
like,
I mean,
this is like
that,
some serious indulgent fantasy nonsense, and it's
yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to avoid all that. And, and I didn't want him to be I didn't want him to be like a James Bond who just sleeps with everything that comes along.
yeah,
I wanted him to
yeah,
be. I'm talking movie James Bond
yes,
there.
yes,
I I wanted him to. I wanted him to be the sort. He's tempted, but reserved about it, and
yeah,
almost sort of frightened of it.
yes,
And because of the issues in his past, and
yeah,
that all seemed to be sort of quite it was mine. It was something a bit different. It was
yeah,
acknowledge. I think it was acknowledging the trope
yeah,
without succumbing to it. I think.
yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that was the intention anyway. That's what I hope. That's what I
It's
hope.
very kind of Hemingway, which is interesting to me. A lot of Hemingway's men, especially if you look at like The Sun Also Rises or Farewell to Arms, they're sort of, particularly The Sun Also Rises, is a very interesting book about like, hard boiled esque male figures and their desire for the femme fatale, but also not being able to achieve that relationship with that individual that they want to be with.
Yeah,
In Sun Also Rises, I mean, it's Lady Brett who's like, leave me alone. I don't want you because you can't do what I want you to do. Because the character, for those who don't know, Jake Barnes in Sun Also Rises doesn't have a dick. It was blown off in the war. Um, so he can't
I'm not sure
provide
I can pull that off.
he
Pardon the
can't
pun.
provide the satisfaction that she wants, so she won't go near that.
Yeah,
It's complicated stuff, but it's like you see his character is constantly frustrated because he loves this woman so much, but she just can't give him what he wants, and it's this sort of hopeless
yeah,
relationship. And that is all every hard-boiled detective is whether male or female. Everything is a hopeless relationship, except when it comes to romance.
yeah.
I mean,
Absolutely,
Spencer, I think, is
absolutely.
really the only one that comes to mind where I'm like, yeah, he's the only one who has a successful, sustained relationship. Sarah
Yeah,
Paretsky's Wasarski and Kinsey Milhone, from Sue Grafton, Marlowe, Easy Rollins, they all have bad relationships and marriages that fail, and yeah,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
interesting.
yeah. And also, there's the thing that if you're gonna write a series,
Mm,
you can't. I personally don't want either as a reader or as a writer to
mm,
find myself in a position where Priest meets a woman or Private Eye meets a woman, and you think, well, by page 50 they'll be in bed together.
yeah.
And if they go to bed together, I bet you any money she's involved in
Mm,
whatever the secret or the crime or the corruption is.
yeah.
And then he's going to be heartbroken.
Yeah.
I thought better better to have something that there's always the chance that it will happen.
Mm,
So will this be the book that it happens in, sort of thing?
yeah. Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
seems to me to be a different spin on it. Like I say, acknowledging a trope or a cliche, whichever you might want to call it,
Yeah.
but trying to do something different with it.
Yeah.
Just trying to twist it a little bit
Yeah.
to say,
Yes.
this putting your stamp on it.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like what Chandler said. For him, it's a matter of style. It's a matter of what you bring to it and how you play with it. And that's definitely what I tried to do with Wasteland as well. Because that the femme fatale was hard. It was hard to deal with. It was like, I don't know if I want her to be the villain. And I really played with that idea, and what this character's function was meant to be in the story, and her relationship to my detective. And it's tough because it's very easy to, you have it be that, I mean, in one, I'm not gonna, won't spoil anything about that book, but like, there was definitely earlier drafts where she was way more villainous than she maybe ends up being in the final product.
Well, and it seemed interesting to me that if you've got a character who's so obviously the femme fatale or the femme fatale figure, it struck me that it might be quite interesting if the reader could say, well, is she involved in it? Is she part of it? Whereas if you do a typical femme fatale, they're going to say, well, she's going to, she is involved. She's because that's her role. Yeah. But if there's something a bit different about it, I'd like to think there's the element of, well, is she involved in this?
Yes.
Whatever it is. Or is she going to turn out to be like a hero? A heroine?
Yeah.
What is she going to be? That seems to me much more interesting than the normal femme fatale character,
Yeah, definitely.
And also, they've been done before, and they've been done extremely well before. So you'd have to do them extremely, extremely well.
Yes.
To get away with it.
The femme fatale has to be like, when you were talking earlier about like when Golden Age stuff, like planting the clues and the like the subversion and the misdirection. The femme fatale has to be the thing that is done exceptionally well, so that you can really manipulate the reader with them. So obviously, this is a hard-boiled book set in the UK. It's interesting because, there, as we were saying, like, there aren't really many of them. There are some that toy with it. Most British fiction that is more hard-boiled tends to be Scottish, though still is more police procedural than PI. Though there is a lot of PI influence on, William McIlvanney and Val McDermott and Ian Rankin and so on.
I think Rebus is, to all intents and purposes, the Rebus books could be written in the first person. He is definitely
he's basically a private eye. Yeah,
he is. And in these later books where he's no longer a cop, he definitely is like a private eye.
Yeah. Except now he can't walk upstairs.
No, he can't walk upstairs. But he does things like he does things that are quite amusing. Like he'll show, I don't know, is it his health card or his disabled badge or something, and pretend it's a warrant card. Things like that. That's just a real nice touches.
It's fun. I love it. So I guess what's interesting to me is you went for this one versus doing another. I mean, you are doing another Golden Age book, but you really wanted to, produce a gritty noir novel set in the UK. You are a British writer. That's a hard enough sell as it is. But my question is, do you, because everything nowadays is so focused on the goddamn cozy. Everything has to be a cozy story set with some freaking geriatric detective or multiple geriatrics who are limping around trying to solve some murders. Drives me absolutely nuts. But my question is, do you think that the cozy is now just completely overbaked here?
Yes, I do actually, and the cozy isn't really something that interests me. I think it's too easy to say that Golden Age is all cozy, because it isn't. Cozy to me are the sort of books. I did a talk about this at Gladstone Libraries, saying that the Golden Age, and Agatha Christie in particular, isn't as twee as you think it is. That's her greatest trick. And I sort of very briefly likened it you know, the serial poisoner in the village who turns out to be the little old lady at the end of the street.
Yeah.
The reaction to that, you know, that's like Harold Shipman, who turns the nice, cozy, gentle local GP who turns out to be the worst serial killer in, you know, British history.
Yeah.
Whereas when Hannibal Lecter's, we're expecting it, we're waiting for it. You know, it's when it's the unexpected. So I don't think cozy to me are those sort of books that are all set in, you know, baking communities, or they've got like you know, it's like the WI. Yeah. And then there's a body at the apple pie stand at the church fair or whatever. Yeah. And usually some sort of animal involvement. You know.
Yeah.
That to me is cozy, and it has its place. I mean, it's extremely popular.
Yeah.
But it doesn't interest me. So
yeah,
my golden age stuff, whilst it is a golden age setup, it is a closed circle of suspects and all that. I'm much more influenced by people like P.D. James.
Yeah.
Who writes books about people that just so happen to be in one place when something dreadful occurs. So I was quite eager to show that life went on, because at the end of some golden age, and the worst of the golden age,
and by some you actually mean all. I know where you're going with this. And the answer is all.
He says, Poirot gets them all together in the drawing room, and he says, well, it could have been you, could have been you, could have been you. Actually, it was you. And then everyone says, well, thank goodness that's over, let's have tea.
Yes.
Whereas what P.D. James does is say, these lives are wrecked and they will never be the same again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I try to bring some of that to my golden age. So golden age doesn't necessarily need to be cozy. But I think I think it is being overexposed. I really do. And I get that it's escapism. And again, after the First World War, that's when the golden age started to take off, because it was an antidote to what was going on.
Yeah.
And we live in troubled times now, so I can see why they are an escape.
Yeah.
But I think that we're more sophisticated now, and I think that having a total escape can be a bit bland.
I agree. Yeah.
I think you've still got to say something about, even if it's not the world you live in now, because writing historical fiction can't be.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, people are the same. We've changed, but we're not really that different to how we were. And what the best historical crime fiction does is say, that's what it was like then. Now look outside your window and ask yourself how much it has changed.
Yeah.
Because very often the answer is not that much, you know.
No. It's fascinating.
So,
go on.
Sorry, I do think cozy as cozy.
Yeah.
I think is rapidly in danger of getting saturated.
Yeah. I mean, I think it has that. I mean, I was in a bookstore today, and I cheekily took a picture of the display, because there were several books on this table with virtually identical covers.
Yeah.
By entirely, not even the same series, but by entirely different people. And I'm like, I can tell just by looking at this cover what this book is going to be about. And that to me is boring. I shouldn't have to see, like, the font was the same, the style was the same. I'm like, this is just, and it's basically how I described it. Because I took a picture and sent it to some friends. And I was like, this is just like, it just feels like at times all people want is a copy of an imitation, and they just want that imitation that they've copied. And it's tough. And like I love Golden Age stuff. I do. I love Sherlock Holmes, which is really kind of the originator of Golden Age style, then taken on by Christie and more so popularized by Christie and Dorothy Sayers and people like that. And a lot of it is it's a lot of fun. You know, you can enjoy it. I do think there is an interesting kind of conversation happening at the moment amongst cozy writers who are getting really annoyed by the term cozy. One of my least favorite authors, who is a cozy author and just happens to be super famous, but I won't say his or her name. But I'm sure anyone who knows me knows exactly who I'm talking about. Was frustrated because they were being called, cozy, and it's like you're writing geriatric detectives. Like, there's nothing realistic about anything you're writing because all of your protagonists would need a goddamn nap by 11 o'clock in the morning. And it's funny because it's like, there's this like there's like this sense of shame. It's like they're ashamed of what they're writing. It's like my original stuff was golden age stuff. I know what I was writing. I know what I was doing. It's not trying to be realistic. It's not trying to be gritty. It's not trying to be hard hitting. It's just fun, locked room kind of mysteries. And
And what's
that's
wrong with that?
yeah, like accept what you're doing. Don't be afraid of what you're doing. Like,
No,
right.
absolutely.
I think the everyone, like, there's this, I think people are trying to fool themselves by trying to pretend like writing cozy or even writing like, well, cozy is basically the modern day golden age style. It's like, I think there's this kind of people trying to fool themselves into thinking what they're writing is hard hitting crime fiction. And it's like, no, you aren't, but that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, it doesn't appeal to me, but it
No.
is hugely popular.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's fine. It's just that it wouldn't engage me, and we can't all be the same. So
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think there's anything particularly cozy about, a corpse, whether that's in a library or in a vicarage or in a churchyard or wherever it might be. But how that corpse is treated and how that crime is treated,
yes,
can be done in a cozy way.
Yes.
But you're right. You're dead right. You've got to accept that what you're doing is totally artificial, because the truth of the matter is, if you set one of those stories today, any protagonist you come up with, apart from a policeman, would not get anywhere near it.
Yeah, so true.
So it's already automatically artificial.
Yeah.
By its very nature.
Yeah.
So what I did with my golden age stuff, I sort of embraced that because I couldn't write. You can't write convincingly a locked room mystery with CCTV and mobile phones.
No.
It doesn't work.
Yeah.
And I wanted an amateur sleuth who was intelligent and thought laterally and all that business, because that's what I liked.
Yeah.
So if you set them in the past, there's like a buffer of time.
Yes.
Because it's in the past, and we all watch Poirot and we all watch Miss Marple that are also in the past, it's easier to accept that the police would be a bit more, whatever the word is, lenient to this interfering amateur.
Yeah.
Because it's got the cushion of historical fiction.
Yes.
Whereas if you said it in 2023, you just can't buy it. It just doesn't work for me. It becomes so artificial, because although Golden Age is an artificial setup, again, this is the PD James thing. If the characters and the relationships and the attitudes and the reactions are real, it can take on. It can reflect reality, even though it is itself artificial. And that's very much what I try to do in the carnivals, the Everett Carnival.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he himself is a trope, but the people around him are real people with real issues.
Yeah.
And that sort of seems to work.
Yeah, and I think again, because like with the Golden Age sort of stuff, like I think back to like, Sherlock Holmes, like The Adventure of the Yellow Face and things like that. They don't really, in general, Golden Age stuff doesn't really address real societal problems. It might be there a little bit, but it doesn't fully address it, and it surely doesn't address street level crime, which is what hard-boiled fiction does. Hard-boiled fiction will address street level stuff. Golden Age stuff tends to be British upper class white people problems. You know what I mean?
Well, it is, because that's where it came from. That's where it came from. Yeah. And the Sherlock Holmes novel, I mean, the Sherlock Holmes stories, they are cozy to a certain extent for me, but some of them do deal with unpleasant things.
Yeah.
And very rarely is Sherlock Holmes in the in the situation that Poirot will be in.
Yeah.
There are no. He's more akin to,
Yeah.
like I said earlier, he's more akin to Marlowe in that he's dealing with the underworld. He's dealing with blackmailers. He's dealing with politicians.
Yeah.
Every now and again, he might have to confront, a ghostly dog or a snake down a bell pool. But they are, they are one of many of the types of stories. There's so many and varied.
Yeah.
But they're not always. Very few of them are whodunits. He investigates murders, but there's no circle of suspects that he's got to choose from.
No.
Very often the murderer comes in at the end.
Yes.
And you've never met him before.
Yeah.
So in that way, they're about the crime. They're about the investigation. They're not about who's done it. They're about how Holmes gets there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the crime. That's the puzzle. That's the game that people love.
That's the game that people love. Yeah. And what Christie did was emphasize the puzzle element by saying, well, all right, I'll add a little cherry on that cake and say, well, which one of them was it?
Yes.
Yeah. And you're right. We've not really got out of that. The British haven't really
not in British, not on this side of the pond. Absolutely not. No.
And so like I said, I wanted Priest to be something different. And for me, there's a marked difference between Alex Priest and my other character, Everett Carr. There are two totally different people doing totally different things and serving totally different purposes.
Definitely.
And Priest is I think Priest is a much more he's a much more believable man. I think he's a much more he's a human being. I think. I hope. Anyway. I hope.
I think so. I think what you did was really good and really fun with Priest. And I feel like this with a lot of the more hard-boiled stuff is it's. I am in no way saying that this kind of fiction is realistic in terms of like what realism is, because it's a stylistic exaggeration of reality. But in terms of the crime and how people act and interact and react, there's a sense, there's a plausibility to it that I think makes this genre a bit more fun for me, and why I dig books like The House of Skulls, and why I love these like film noir. You're a big film noir fan, so before we kind of wrap up, like I'm one of my last questions for you then is, as you're a big fan of film noir, what do you think is the most underrated noir film, and why is it The Two Jakes?
I think it is Two Jakes. I think it is a very underrated film.
Should we clarify what The Two Jakes is? Because I'm worried that people might not even know what what we're talking about now. Because
The Two Jakes is a sequel to a film called Chinatown, which came out in 1974.
Yeah, directed by Roman Polanski, starring Jack Nicholson. It was directed by
Roman Polanski, and funnily enough, starring Jack Nicholson as a private eye in the late 1930s. And he's a private eye who specializes in, again, subverting the Marlowe cliche, who doesn't do divorce cases.
Yeah.
Nicholson's character specializes in them. He specializes in catching cheating spouses.
Yeah.
And he's set up, essentially. And he then decides that he's going to find out who has set him up and why. And that in doing that, he like we were saying before, he comes across a massive slice of corruption and murder and blackmail. The Two Jakes was the sequel that came out, I think, in 1990.
1990, like 14 or so on years later, or something like that.
16 years later, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a similar. Nicholson plays the same character called J.J. Gittis. He's obviously in The Two Jakes come on from Chinatown.
Yeah.
The events of Chinatown. He's got a much more plush office. He's got smarter clothes. Nicholson purposely put on weight to show that he's settled into himself. So he's a bit paunchy around the middle. And again, he's essentially set up. and he has to get to the bottom of whether or not this man who his client is also called Jake, and Gittis's first name is Jake, so that's the title explained. And Gittis has to find out whether his partner has legally murdered a man or acted in a moment of insanity because he's found his wife in bed with this man who was his business partner. So that's a very brief summary of both films. But I do think it's underrated. And I think one of the reasons it's underrated is that it had an impossible task because it could never follow Chinatown successfully. Chinatown is so good. It's a borderline masterpiece. Yeah. It's my favorite film of all time. We did a lengthy show on it.
We did.
Explaining why it's my favorite film of all time. And I just think sometimes sequels are better than the first. The Empire Strikes Back is a famous example. Yeah. But mostly they're not. And this to me is a bit like the Temple of Doom. It had it almost had no chance of because Chinatown is so good. That's the point. Yeah. And it doesn't help itself that its plot, the Two Jakes plot, and the way it's told constantly references Chinatown.
Yes. So yes. It is very, very much a sequel to Chinatown. It's almost like, even though 16 years have passed, it feels like it could be like the next day, because his whole life is still sort of revolved around those events that happened.
Absolutely. And it's, I mean, for the film to work, because the theme of the film is your past will always come and get you. Yeah. And you can't escape it. Yeah. And so it has to deal with Gittis's past for that theme to work. I mean, I think one of the lines is Gittis says the past, there's always more where that came from, which sort of sums up the whole plot. Yeah. So it did have to reference Chinatown. I get that, but I just wonder whether it had to do it so obviously.
I wonder. I was going to ask you. I mean, I'm happy to do some brief spoilers here, but we don't have to necessarily go into it. But I'm wondering. Does the twist? The twist in Chinatown is incredible, and no one sees that coming. That's one of the best twists. I'm not going to spoil it here, even though the film is like a million years old. But I'm wondering, was the twist in Chinatown that the wife of Jake, not Jake Gittis, but the other Jake, is the daughter of a character in the first film. Did it need to be? Did it land? No. Was it needed? I don't think so.
Well, I've always said no, and I've also always said that it's pretty obvious who she is. Yeah, because it's so. The minute the name is mentioned, and she's mentioned on a recording, which is really like a MacGuffin throughout the whole film. Everyone's got their hand on this recording. And the minute the name is mentioned, you think, well, there's a character of the right age who is clearly a lead character. She's played by Meg Tilly. Yeah. That's going to be her, isn't it? That's going to be her. Yeah. And so it's no great surprise when it turns out that it is. Yeah. So no, I don't think it did really, and it's the constant references. I mean, he visits his love interest. Yeah, and he visits the butler, the Asian butler.
Oh yes. And
I don't think that needs to happen. I mean, the whole film, just in and over, the whole film needs cutting by about 30 minutes.
Yeah, it's a bit long.
It's a bit like Nicholson. It's a bit flabby around the middle.
Yeah.
A bit like Nicholson. And there are certain scenes I think you could, if you were really honest with yourselves, you could have cut this out. Yeah. But when I watched it last night in readiness for this, that's probably the viewing that I've enjoyed the most. Yeah. And because I've not seen it for a while, so I was going to it sort of, and there was a picture where I thought, oh, I forgot that. And there are some nice touches. There are some really nice touches. Yes. And I thought, hang on, it was the first time I thought that the Chinatown connection perhaps is more necessary than I'd thought in the past, because in a way it's Gittus getting it's him putting things right. It's his story of redemption, because when he does what he does with the wire recording, and his motive for doing that, is as far as he can. Again, no spoilers. Putting right what he once, made happen.
Yeah, I agree. What is interesting to me is when I think about the two Jakes, and I think about a modern comparison in terms of a film with a legacy sequel, because this is a legacy sequel. Because I think once you get past 10 years before you do a sequel, then you're in that legacy territory. I feel like there's some interesting comparisons between the two Jakes. Well, Chinatown and Two Jakes, and Blade Runner and Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah,
Both are legacy sequels. Both are a little flabby, but both are fun and engaging and deeply connected to the original. And quite, and like I said, just really, I mean, I love them both. I think they're both fun sequels, but they do also kind of suffer from some of the same problems.
I think with the two Jakes, this is almost impossible to do, because if you take out the Chinatown, like I say, if you take out the Chinatown references, the plot doesn't work. Or well.
Yeah. Well, Jake is, his whole thing is he is actually trying to find this woman. He's trying to find So it is his story is very much connected to that.
His story, well, his entire journey of the film, his character arc is, for me, is finding that character.
Yeah, he doesn't really care about the case he's actually meant to be solving. He cares about finding.
No, he doesn't. And of course, like. In a lot of private eye stuff, they seem to be two separate cases and they merge.
Yes. But
if you try to watch it on its own terms and on its own merits, it's not a bad little private eye film.
No,
it's got all the things. Just like we're saying about House of Skulls, it's got all the things it's got some dodgy deals. It's got some corruption. It's got a bit of blackmail. It's got a mob connection. It's got a private eye who's out of his depth, but won't give up, and in the end is morally, if not legally, triumphant. And it's got some great lines. Nicholson at one point says, "What I do for a living may not be honourable, but I am. In this town, I'm the leper with the most fingers."
Yeah.
Now that is a killer line for me.
That's a good line.
And Chandler would be raising a gimlet to that, because I think that is I think that is fantastic, and it's full of lines like that. So if you try and watch it on its own terms and don't say to yourself, "This is just constantly reminding me of a much better film," then you can have quite a nice ride with it. I think it's certainly not as bad as people say it is, and I think it needs to be reassessed. I think.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's definitely something to that. It's not as bad as like going from Empire Strikes Back to Return of the Jedi. It's kind of like going from Empire Strikes Back to Star Wars. It's a good movie. It holds up. There's a lot of fun stuff to it. And yeah, it's very enjoyable. I totally get why for you it's an underrated noir film.
I would much rather watch the two Jakes than watch the Liam Neeson Marlowe film.
Oh, I still haven't watched that, and I have no desire.
Quite. But I think it is underrated, and I think it's undeservedly so, because I think it has moments of its own type of brilliance, and it's just that it's not Chinatown,
Yes.
It might have been preferable if they could have demonstrated his past catching up with him in a different way and having a totally unconnected case. But then it wouldn't be a Chinatown sequel. It would be another J.J. Gittus film.
Yes.
But like you say, it is a true sequel.
Yeah, it is.
It's not just another another installment in his life. It is like the Indiana Jones films are just different parts of his life.
Yes.
And things like Inspector Morse are just different parts of his life. This is a true sequel, and you can't really understand it if you've not watched Chinatown. You have to watch both.
Yes. Yeah. It's like Blade. Again, it's like Blade Runner 2049.
Yeah.
You have to really have known the first one to fully get what is going on and the gravitas of certain situations, for sure. Yeah.
But it's very good. It doesn't use a sledgehammer with you. It presupposes that you have seen Chinatown.
Yes, it doesn't treat the audience like they're idiots, which is what most modern movies do.
If it were written now, Gittis would have a good 2-minute monologue or discussion with another character about what happened.
The entire plot of Chinatown. Yeah.
Well, it doesn't do that.
No,
it doesn't do that.
Which I gotta give credit to Blade Runner 2049 for not doing that. That's another one that really it expects that you've seen that first movie, and doesn't really hold your hand, which I appreciate.
It gives you enough. The Two Jets gives you enough, I suppose, that you could piece together what happened in Chinatown. But if you watch that and you haven't seen Chinatown, it will completely ruin Chinatown for you.
Yes. Oh God. Yes. Absolutely. Well, Matthew, let's wrap this up. This was a lot of fun. I enjoy talking noir fiction with you. I always enjoy talking crime fiction and movies and things. Everyone needs to head to the local bookstore or Amazon or wherever and pick up The House of Skulls.
You can get it through the publishers, Pegasus, Elliott Mackenzie. You can get it on Waterstones. It's on Amazon. Please give it a try.
Yes, and then give it a good review, as long as you like it.
Give it a review.
If you didn't like it, don't give it a review. This is a lot of fun. Where can people find you on social media?
I'm on whatever Twitter's called these days, X.
Yes,
as
it's called Stupid.
Holmes, as at Holmes Booth, and I'm on Instagram as Matthew Booth Author.
Nice. So find Matthew, this was a lot of fun. Look forward to having you on again in the future when you got your next book out.
Thank you very much, Luke, and thanks for having me on for this. And
you're very welcome. Thanks everyone for listening. And I will say that again.
Thanks for the chat about the House of Skulls.
You're welcome. Thanks everyone for listening. It was a lot of fun. Make sure to like and subscribe and share this podcast with all of your friends and get the word out about the Secret Circle. Until next time, see you later.
The Secret Circle.